here, Laura, which is that these broadcast companies, ABC, NBC, CBS, they enjoy the public airwaves because they serve the public interest. So I actually think that we should be having a conversation about whether these companies are serving the public interest. That's actually totally separate from the Jimmy Kimmel issue because nothing happened to him. He's currently on the air, and to the extent that he's not, it's because advertisers don't like him because his ratings aren't very good.
My ratings aren't very good. Last time I checked, your ratings were somewhere between a hair in your salad and chlamydia. In 3.5 years, I'm not the one who's going to be doing mascara tutorials on YouTube. How did we wind up with a president and a vice president who wear more makeup than Kylie Jenner and Lady Gaga combined?
Oof, MAGA Mike Johnson has shut down the House of Representatives. He's sending all of the members home. He's saying it's time to go on an early vacation. This as he's totally lost control of the House of Representatives. 4 MAGA Republicans joined forces with the Democrats to put forward a discharge petition that would force a vote for a 3-year extension on the Affordable Care Act subsidies.
Sometimes the best way to expose a hypocrite is to simply let them talk. And when that hypocrite happens to be the Vice President of the United States, a man who spent years calling Donald Trump America's Hitler before becoming his most loyal servant, the contradictions become impossible to hide. Over the past few months, Jimmy Kimmel hasn't just mocked J.D. Vance, he's systematically exposed every lie, every deflection, and every pathetic attempt by Vance to rewrite history and defend the indefensible.
You said, I'm a never Trump guy, never liked him. Terrible candidate, idiot if you voted for him, might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroine, noxious and reprehensible.
Look, I was wrong about Donald Trump. I didn't think he was going to be a good president, Brett. He was a great president.
I didn't know the President of the United States made it very clear he wants to see me and the hundreds of people who work here fired from our jobs. Our leader celebrates Americans losing their livelihoods because he can't take a joke. He was somehow able to squeeze Colbert out of CBS. Then he turned his sights on me, and now he's openly rooting for NBC to fire Jimmy Fallon and Seth Meyers and the hundreds of Americans who work for their shows.
Imagine the sheer audacity it takes for a sitting president and
certain so-called moderate Republicans who are not all that moderate were trying to propose different solutions in order to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies via discharge petitions. They ended up getting into a fight with each other so they could actually propose nothing. And you had Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries hold his ground and say, that's not what the American people want. They want a clean 3-year extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Meanwhile, MAGA Mike and other MAGA leadership was telling those so-called moderate Republicans that we will absolutely kill.
And every time Kimmel landed a punch, Vance erupted. He attacked Kimmel's ratings. He called Kimmel's audience humorless scolds. He claimed government threats against ABC were just a joke. But the more Vance protested, the more obvious it became. Jimmy Kimmel had gotten under his skin so deeply that the Vice President of the United States couldn't stop obsessing over a late-night comedian. This is the story of how Jimmy Kimmel exposed J.D. Vance on live TV and how Vance's meltdowns proved that every word Kimmel said was true.
Vice President Maybelline was making the rounds, attempting to defend his boss and the chairman of the FCC with a new fairy tale even a 5-year-old wouldn't believe.
Celebrities are rallying to his cause, saying this is a First Amendment assault being carried out by the FCC, Brendan Carr, and by the President of the United States himself. And to that you say?
Well, there are two things. First of all, I'd like them to tell me exactly what Brendan Carr did to have Jimmy Kimmel taken off the air, because number one, he is currently on the air, and to the extent that he isn't in certain stations, it's because he's not funny and because his ratings aren't very good.
I have some good news for you, J-Dog. We're back on all the stations.
Any bill, any discharge petition that has any extension at all of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. So what went down yesterday was that those 4 Republicans joined forces with the Democrats. They effectuated the discharge petition, and rather than allow it to ripen now, MAGA Mike calls a vacation. He says, we're all leaving. This way he can avoid a vote on the discharge petition to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies, and he wants to push it until later in January, and this assures that the Affordable Care Act subsidy extension will expire when it expires on December 31st. Folks, this is as cruel as it gets.
Before we dive into this epic saga of exposure and eruption, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're bringing you the accountability journalism that mainstream media won't touch, and we need your support to keep exposing the truth. September 17th, 2025. Just days after ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel following government pressure over his comments about the Charlie Kirk assassination, J.D. Vance appeared on a podcast to fill in for Kirk. And Vance, clearly feeling emboldened now that Kimmel had been silenced, decided to tell a massive lie about political violence in America.
And it isn't just random MAGA nuts and sweaty Teddy doing this. Trump's own running mate, J.D. Vance, is the main source of this nonsense. He's been talking about this in speeches. He's been posting about this as much as he can. The city of Springfield, in his state, Ohio, says there have been no credible reports of Haitians eating pets. But J.D. Vance, who wants to be vice president of the United States, keeps bringing it up.
And CNN asked Vance's office why he is pushing such a blatant lie. They said, Senator Vance has received a high volume of calls and emails over the past several weeks from concerned citizens in Springfield. His tweet is based on what he is hearing from them.
Oh, he's getting calls. I didn't know he was getting calls. Now it makes sense.
And it gets even crueler because yesterday MAGA Mike put forward and had his Republican base support another healthcare plan that had nothing to do with extending the Affordable Care Act subsidies. But what it actually did is in Section 202, it limited women's reproductive rights and basically stopped funding for any plans that would provide women's reproductive rights in blue states as well. So it would effectively kill women's reproductive rights in blue states or severely harm them if you were on an existing plan. So not only did MAGA Mike refuse to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies,
while our side of the aisle certainly has its crazies, Vance said, his voice dripping with false reasonableness, it is a statistical fact that most of the lunatics in American politics today are proud members of the far left. A statistical fact. Vance called it a statistical fact. And when Jimmy Kimmel returned to the air on September 23rd, he didn't let that lie stand for even a second. J.D. Vance pointed his little mascara-stained finger directly at the left, Kimmel said before playing the clip of Vance's claim. Then Kimmel delivered the truth. And by statistical fact, he means complete bullshit.
Tim just said something that I agree with. I agree. And I actually think I agree with you. I actually agree with Tim Walz. I agree with a lot of what Senator Vance said. Governor, I agree with you. I agree with that. And I think that Governor Walz and I actually probably agreed.
Well, Trump is not going to like that at all. You're in a lot of trouble, JD.
he took the lack of extended Affordable Care Act subsidies and said, let's screw women's reproductive rights. So MAGA Mike is running through the halls of Congress and he's saying, I haven't lost control. I haven't lost control. This as he's lost control of the House, as those 4 Republicans were like, okay, well, if we can't support an extension of the Affordable Care Act subsidies because MAGA Mike, you're killing it, we're going to join forces with the Democrats. And Hakeem Jeffries held his ground and those Republicans sided with Jeffries. Watch MAGA Mike run away.
The audience erupted in applause because everyone paying attention knows the actual statistics. The Justice Department, Trump's own Justice Department, had concluded that the far right is the greatest source of domestic terror and extremist violence in America. Not the left, the right. White supremacists, neo-Nazis, MAGA extremists. That's where the violence comes from. And Kimmel had the perfect question to prove it. Here's a question J.D. Vance might be able to answer, Kimmel said, his voice sharp with contempt. Who wanted to hang the guy who was vice president before you? Was that the liberal left or the toothless army who stormed the Capitol on January 6th?
Seriously, if that guy walked into your office and told you he was there to start making cuts.
I have friends who met a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, who met the best man at their wedding at Turning Points USA because it was an organization of patriots dedicated to making this country the very best country that it could.
Right after he shuts down the House, and says everybody's going home. Here, play this clip.
Have you lost control of the House?
I have not lost control of the House.
Because this is the third time.
There are look, we have the smallest majority in U.S. history. Okay? These are not normal times. There are processes and procedures in the House that are less frequently used when there are larger majorities. And when you have the luxury of having 10 or 15 people who disagree on something, you don't have to deal with it.
The answer, of course, was obvious to everyone. On January 6, 2021, Trump supporters erected a gallows outside the Capitol and chanted, "Hang Mike Pence," because Pence refused to overturn the election. Far-right domestic terrorists, the same people Vance now represents as vice president, literally tried to murder his predecessor. But Vance couldn't acknowledge that reality, because acknowledging it would mean admitting that his entire political career is built on serving the same authoritarian movement that wanted to hang Mike Pence. So instead, Vance did what he always does when confronted with the truth. He attacked the messenger.
Of meddling where they shouldn't under many administrations, but it wasn't always like this. There was an FCC commissioner back in 2022 who worked under Joe Biden who was spot on. He wrote, "President Biden is right. Political satire is one of the oldest and most important forms of free speech. It challenges those in power while using humor to draw more people into the discussion. That's why people in influential positions have always targeted it for censorship." You know who wrote that? FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr.
The White House border czar Tom Homan was recorded on an FBI surveillance tape in September 2024, accepting $50,000 in cash. Did he keep that money or give it back?
George, you've covered the story ad nauseum. Tom Homan did not take a bribe. It's a ridiculous smear. And the reason you guys are going after Tom Homan so aggressively is because he's doing the job of enforcing the law.
Before MAGA Mike shut it down and you see him running in the hallways there saying, "I haven't lost control. I haven't lost control." Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries wrote, "Urgent update. Our bipartisan petition to force a vote on a straightforward extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits now has 218 signatures. Mike Johnson should bring the bill to the floor immediately." Mike Johnson's response, vacation. We're all going home. We're shutting it down. Just how irresponsible, how immature, and how dangerous that is, right? And just think about it though, in the past 3 weeks,
on September 19, 2025, while Kimmel was still suspended, Vance posted on X, "Jimmy Kimmel wasn't funny, his ratings were in the toilet, and his advertisers were revolting." It was a desperate attempt to change the subject from government censorship to Kimmel's supposed failings. And Vance kept going, adding a second post that revealed just how personally threatened he felt by Kimmel's criticism. There was a point where I'd watch his show nearly every night. He's a genuinely talented guy, but like so much good and funny in the world, the woke thing destroyed it. Think about what Vance just admitted.
Our freedom to speak is what they admire most about this country. And that's something I'm embarrassed to say I took for granted until they pulled my friend Steven off the air and tried to coerce the affiliates who run our show in the cities that you live in to take my show off the air. That's not legal. That's not American. That is un-American.
I think it's really preposterous. I know Tom. I think that he's a good man. He gets death threats. He gets attacked. He gets constantly threatened by people because he has the audacity to want to enforce the country's immigration laws. I think that it would be a much more interesting story about why is it that Tom Homan, who is simply enforcing Americans' immigration laws, is getting constantly harassed and threatened to the point of death threats. That's a much more interesting question that I think journalists should focus on.
There's been like 3 separate discharge petitions. Maybe you go back slightly longer than that. You have the Epstein discharge petition. Then there was a discharge petition to overturn Donald Trump banning collective bargaining agreement by federal government employees. And then there was this discharge petition to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies. But rather than MAGA Mike taking it up immediately after this bipartisan end run around him, because he and Trump are blocking it, he shuts down Congress. You can't get more demeaning and just despicable than that. Well, you can. Donald Trump then held that deranged.
He used to watch Kimmel every night. He thought Kimmel was talented. But now that Kimmel was exposing Vance's hypocrisy and defending free speech against government censorship, suddenly Kimmel was destroyed by woke. It wasn't that Kimmel changed. It was that Vance couldn't handle being held accountable. But the real fireworks happened on September 24, 2025, when a reporter asked Vance about the FCC's threats against ABC stations that carried Kimmel's show. The reporter's question was straightforward. I'm wondering if you can square your fervent belief in free speech with what's going on now with Jimmy Kimmel and the FCC pressure.
J.D. Vance, the mainstream media, they want you to think that I'm weird. They call me creepy, cringy, awkward, that I give people something called the ick. They want you to think that I can't order a simple donut.
I guess all you have to do to get J.D. Vance to start spreading crazy things around is make calls. This, by the way, is the direct line to his office, 202-224-3353. Whatever you do not call that number to tell J.D. Vance that rainbow sprinkles at Baskin-Robbins turned your kids gay, okay? Please, do not distract the senator with this kind of silliness. He has Haitian cat eaters to stop.
National address, if you even want to call it that, last night. And what was Donald Trump saying? Donald Trump said, it's the Unaffordable Care Act, and Democrats are the one raising your premiums. They're the ones fighting to raise it, when it's the exact opposite. Donald Trump's tactics are the Putin tactics. Like when Putin goes denazification, right, and makes those vicious lies as pretext to invade Ukraine, Donald Trump goes, it's the Democrats who are raising your premiums. We need to go attack Venezuela because they stole our land, they stole our oil, they're bringing in fentanyl when they're done. What are you even talking about? There's no fentanyl coming out of Venezuela. What land did they steal? What are you talking about? Anyway, here's what Donald Trump says. Here, play this clip.
Now, in the steep increase in premiums being demanded by the Democrats, and they are demanding those increases, and it's their fault. It is not the Republicans' fault. It's the Democrats' fault.
Vance's response was one of the most brazen lies of his entire vice presidency. What people will say is, well, didn't the FCC commissioner put a tweet out that said something bad? Vance said, his voice dripping with condescension. Well, compare that. The FCC commissioner making a joke on social media. A joke. Vance called it a joke. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr had publicly threatened ABC stations with license revocation if they continued airing Kimmel's show. Station owners immediately pulled the show to protect their merger plans. ABC suspended Kimmel indefinitely, and Vance had the audacity to call it just a joke.
Pressure on J.D. Vance tonight. J.D. Vance hasn't been under a microscope like this since his wife asked him why the couch was so sticky. But Trump had good advice. He told him, just have fun, and you know what? It seems like he did.
I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are.
That's how you get the single cat ladies back on your side.
It's the Unaffordable Care Act, and everybody knew it.
And by the way, it shouldn't be lost on us that MAGA Mike Johnson is shutting down the House of Representatives before the day when the Epstein files are set to be released. That's when he's sending all of the members home on a vacation before they're supposed to actually go home in the first place. Now, as MAGA Mike continues to lose control, when he's confronted with the fact that he's going to cause 22 to 24 million Americans to lose health care now,
before becoming Trump's most loyal defender, and he couldn't handle a comedian with a microphone who refused to let those contradictions go unanswered. If this story of accountability and exposure moved you, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Share this video with everyone who needs to understand how authoritarians operate and how comedians can expose them. Because in a world where vice presidents lie about government censorship and attack critics for telling the truth,
First of all, Kimmel was taken off the air because he had low ratings, because the late night talk show host model is not doing particularly well. And let's be honest, because he had become so politically unhinged that I think he wasn't particularly funny. Now, the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, put out a couple of tweets, but the government took no action. We did literally nothing.
Some that I do especially want to mention are my fellow late night talk show hosts, my friend Stephen Colbert, who's found himself in this predicament, my friends Jon Stewart, Seth Meyers, Jimmy Fallon, John Oliver, Conan O'Brien, James Corden, Arsenio, Kathy, Wanda, Chelsea, even Jay reached out.
By refusing to allow this Affordable Care Act extension. Even with this discharge petition, MAGA Mike says, yeah, it's only 7%. 7% of 330 million is 23 million people, as Jonathan Reiner points out. That's a lot of freaking people. And they just poo-poo 23 million people losing their health care and dying. That's why these MAGAs are a death cult. Right? I mean, who does this?
We need more Jimmy Kimmels. We need more people willing to call bullshit on power. We need more voices refusing to be silenced. JD Vance erupted. Jimmy Kimmel exposed him. And every meltdown, every attack, every desperate attempt to change the subject just proved that Kimmel was winning. That's what accountability looks like. And that's why it matters.